Right then, members, if we're ready to make a start, apologies for the delay there. We were just checking some clarification on the Constitution about whether we were quorate this evening. Having reviewed the Constitution, our quorum requirements for this evening are technically 1.5. We have 2 members here this evening, so we are quorate and able to commence this meeting this afternoon. Now, I don't propose to speak all night. I am opening this meeting formally this afternoon on the basis that this committee has not yet elected a chairman or a vice chairman. Just before we start with the election of chairmen, for the benefit of everybody here, I want to just explain the membership of this committee. So on this committee, we have representatives of 5 borough councillors. We also have parish council representatives and independent members who are also part of this committee. The only people on this committee who have voting rights are the borough council members. So just so you're aware, everybody can participate in discussions, but when it comes to voting, it's the borough members who have those rights. One other thing just before we move on to the items on the agenda is to just confirm that the terms of reference for this committee have been placed in front of you on the tables, just in case you haven't had an opportunity to see those. Okay. Right then, members. So the first matter to deal with is item 1 on your agenda this evening, which is appointment of the chairman and vice chairman. Now, in relation to this committee, it's been agreed by council that the chairman will be an independent member. Now, given what I've... Yes, Councillor Parker.
Sorry to do this so early in. Could I just ask, under membership 2014-15, is that actually correct? The people are all down as councillors?
Councillor Parker, thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify that point. Not everybody around this table this evening is a councillor. The parish members are parish councillors, but the independent members are not councillors. And just for your assistance, Councillor Parker, if it was help, I will read out the names of the independent members. So Mr. Keith Bastin, Mr. Chris Evans, Mr. Peter Moore, and Mrs. Elizabeth Morris. I hope that assists. Thank you. So if I may refer back to item 1 on the agenda, which is the appointment of the chair for this committee, I believe the general consensus is that the chair of this committee should be an independent member. Given what I've said about voting rights, we need the vice chair to be a borough councillor. And the reason for that is that an independent member will not be able to exercise their right to a casting vote. So should we get in a situation where a casting vote is required, then the vice chairman would need to step up as chairman and undertake that role. It's hoped that in the nature of this committee that a casting vote will not be required, and that shouldn't be an issue. So if I can start then, please, can I have any nominations for chairman, please?
Can I ask, as an independent non-voting member, can I nominate anybody? That's yes. Can I then move Mr. Keith Bastin as chairman?
I'd like to second that. Thank you.
For the purpose of the procedures, can I ask the borough councillors if they're happy to nominate and second that proposal?
Again, I don't know Mr. Bastin. And if he was here, I would have perhaps asked maybe to have some sort of bit of history. If there's anybody here that can give me some I'm being asked to vote this person as a chair, maybe I could have anyone that knows history of the individual, perhaps.
I don't have precise dates, so I will do my best, Councillor Parker. Mr. Bastin was a previous independent member of the Standards Committee prior to the implementation of the Localism Act, and Mr. Bastin used to chair the Standards Committee meetings. He's been heavily involved with standards matters with the Council for a considerable number of years. I'm not sure if anybody can help me with dates. but he's certainly been around for at least 4 years as an independent member. Does that assist, Councillor Parker?
Agreed? Oh, sorry.
Agreed.
Thank you, members. I'm grateful for that. So moving on to the second, we now need to elect a vice chairman for the purpose of the meeting, and we are looking for a borough councillor representative as a vice chairman.
Could I ask a question on that? I don't know whether the two members here are ready to nominate somebody. If they're not, are we able, well, no, sorry, are the voting members able to defer that decision to another meeting when maybe consultation or more members are present? That's always assuming that they wish that time.
It is a matter that can be deferred. It's not a matter that we need to decide this evening. However, if this is a matter that's going to be deferred, then we may need to consider electing a chairman for the purpose of this meeting.
Cross-party agreement here, which I think stands well for the Standards Committee and bodes good for the future. We would prefer to defer, because then it would mean if all councillors are present, then the agreed vice chair would have support of all of the councillors on the committee.
Thank you. That item will be deferred to the next committee meeting then. On that basis, can I have a nomination for a chairman for the purpose of tonight's meeting?
Might I nominate Mr. Chris Evans?
Is that agreed?
I'll second and agree that.
Back in the old seat, Chris.
Melanie just said to me, welcome back, I've got to read this. Fire evacuation procedures for evening meetings. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and the side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park over in that way. Please note that this meeting is being webcast live on the internet, and mobile phones can all members and public switch their mobile phones off or turn them to silent. Okay. Right. Apologies for absence and substitution. Do we have any?
We've received apologies of absence from Keith Bastin and Councillor Putty and Councillor Tomlin.
Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Thank you. Urgent matters. Do I have any urgent matters? Do we have any urgent matters? No, we don't. Okay, item 5, paper A, is the report from the contact officer, Mr. Sullivan. Introduce it, please.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the paper that's before you this evening is an annual report on the activities that have been taking place in relation to standards matters from March 2013 to April 2014, and it relates to the complaints that the council has received and how these have been dealt with. The recommendation is purely to note this report, members. If I can direct you to page 7 of 39 of the documents that you have in front of you, and that is a brief version of the annual report. I do apologise, there is an error on the maths there. We've had a total of 10 complaints. 2 have related to borough councillors, with the remaining relating to parish councillors. As you'll see there, we've had 2 we haven't investigated, 4 have been no breach of the code, we've dealt with 1 by informal settlement and 3 are still under investigation. You'll see that it's acknowledged in the annual report that we need to review our arrangements for dealing with complaints, and I see that as a priority for this committee to try and ensure that they're dealt with in a much more prompt manner. The annual report also confirms the membership of this committee, and our priorities going forward. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Can I make it quite clear that we are not here to discuss the content of any complaint and the final outcome. So anything other than that?
Thank you, Chair. It was a point of clarity. I'm sorry about my voice. I'm not sure, Melanie, you mentioned 5 borough councillors when you were speaking earlier. And it's actually only 4 on this committee, is that correct?
There is 5 borough councillors on this committee at full council. Last Thursday, Councillor West was nominated to attend this committee as well. He isn't included on the annual report because this was issued before the approval from council.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask Melanie whether we've actually had any complaints about the delay taken in the settlements. I'm possibly it's incorporated here and I just haven't picked it up.
Yes, unfortunately, we have received complaints about the delays that have been taking place during the course of the process, which is why we're recognised as a high priority for this committee.
What would we be aiming for in terms of an ideal timescale for this to be dealt with? Because I note in the comment that it is a suggestion that whilst the handling of complaints has taken longer, the positive of that is that may well have ended with more amicable agreement during the process. And I wouldn't want expediency to perhaps then lose that advantage.
I think that's a really valid point, and I think that a priority of this new regime is informal settlement and seeing if a resolution can be brought in relation to matters, and that will remain our priority. It is something that I wouldn't feel uncomfortable to put a timescale on, but after this meeting is closed, I'll be going through what our arrangements are, and they are quite restrictive in how they work, and it makes it difficult for officers. I also have to accept that there's been a capacity issue on these types of matters, and that is something that we're looking into and we're looking to improve going forward.
Do we know the report?
Can you just...
Yeah, sure.
Just with that in mind and the comments that have been made, I just want to make sure that members are happy that we treat as a priority reviewing this process to deal with the complaints. Thank you.
So, number 6, dispensations, paper B. Do you want to talk to it?
So the recommendation is set out on page 23 of the papers that you have before you, and it is to approve the procedure at Appendix C. I do apologise, for some reason we have 2 Appendix Bs rather than Appendix C. It's the second Appendix B that I'm asking you to approve, and for your assistance that's on page 34. Also asking that this function is delegated to the monitoring officer. In terms of this procedure, there's been very little amendments since this process was put in place through the Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee. So it's really just to reflect the fact that this is now a Standards Committee matter rather than Audits and Governance Accounts Committee matter. Just to explain, a dispensation can be required if a councillor has an interest, but they feel that they want an opportunity to vote. And there's certain grounds when a dispensation can be granted to allow councillors with an interest the opportunity to vote. And this may be, for example, where so many councillors have an interest that we need them to vote, otherwise we can't make decisions. or we need them to make sure there's proper representation on political bodies, or it's in the interest of the inhabitants of the authority that a dispensation is granted. And these grounds are set out at paragraph 3.3 of my report. At the moment, this process is set out so that it's dealt with by a subcommittee made up of independent members who make a recommendation to the monitoring officer. So if we were to receive an application for a dispensation tomorrow, my first port of action would be to contact the independent members and arrange a subcommittee with 3 independent members chairing that committee. They would review the application, and in determining whether to grant that application, they would have regard to, if you just give me one moment, members. They would have regard to the nature of the interest, the need to maintain public confidence in the conduct of council business, the need for efficient and effective control of council business, and any other relevant circumstances. So those are the matters that the members would be considering when making their decision. The only other point that I want to make you aware of, members, is that in the past year, since the introduction of the Localism Act, we have received no applications for a dispensation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Not a good start for me, is it? Thank you, Chair. If I could be so bold as to raise a query on clause 5, which appears on page 34 or 39. And by way of assisting fellow committee members, I'm also looking at the same clause which appears on page 28 of 39. The word in particular is what I have an issue with. And my question to Melanie is, Chair, if I may, through you, is the revised wording introduces what appears to me some discretion that hasn't previously been there. Therefore, I'm wondering if this new wording on page 34 is prescribed wording, or whether it's something that we've sort of are promoting ourselves. In particular, where it says the monitoring officer will then have full delegated authority to deal with those matters, and where appropriate. And this isn't the wording that has been in the audit process, which is on page 28. This seems to be an addition which gives an element of decision making by the monitoring officer. And the power of this committee is one of independence, in the sense of the question mark that I wrote against that then is, why do we have a subcommittee of independent members who put forward a recommendation? I would think that if there's no reason for changing that paragraph, then it should remain as it is previously, which actually says the subcommittee of independent members make a recommendation and the monitoring officer carries them out.
Councillor Parker, thank you for raising that issue. If I can explain, it is set out in the report at paragraph 3.7, but it may not directly link to what you've just said. But just to explain, the reason for that amendment is, unfortunately, following the introduction of the Localism Act, the position is that independent members cannot have voting rights. So independent members cannot make decisions on behalf of this authority. That is an unfortunate situation to be in, but because that is the legal position, they need to be making a recommendation to the monitoring officer. And the reason that I've added that in is any individual who takes a decision at this authority has to have regard to all the relevant circumstances. So they can't, I don't want to speak too legalistic, but the word that's used is you cannot fetter somebody's discretion. So if somebody has authority to make a decision, you cannot tighten their authority so much that they can only make one decision. So it is purely a clarification from a point of law view. I understand it's not ideal. The position is supported by the independent members that if it was possible we would have them with voting rights and this wouldn't be an issue. But given they can't make a decision, I felt it was necessary to be clear of what the monitoring officer's role was so that we're not fettering that person's discretion in any way. I hope I've explained that clearly. If I haven't, please do let me know.
Melanie, thank you for that. I had got a sort of a big question mark against 3.7, and it's this business about the localism and the non-voting issue, which I now do properly follow. The only question I would then have is, does the monitoring officer have to justify his decision? Is there any means in the process that if I'm wrong in the application of what I'm reading, is that there's a chance that he may choose not to, unlikely, that he may choose not to carry out the recommendation of this committee's panel of independent subcommittee. It gets very complicated, doesn't it? New to me, but there we go. I'm very protective of the thing independent. And so then it comes back to the a paid officer. No intention of suggesting he would not carry out his duties appropriately. But so then I would just ask, I'm getting about it in a long way, trying to justify why I'm asking it and challenging it so early on in my membership of this committee. But would he have to justify and then give some sort of paragraph as to why he's chosen not to do that, to accept the subcommittee's recommendation?
I think you summed up the position very well there, probably better than I did, to be fair, Councillor Parker. In terms of the point you make, yes, the monitoring officer would have to give reasons. However, for clarification, I think we should actually look at adding that into the procedure that we've got at Appendix C, so that members do have that comfort. So I'm just looking on page 36, paragraph 13. There is reference to the monitoring officer will then, where appropriate, give effect to that recommendation and the council be notified in writing. Perhaps there, if we add something along the lines of, should the monitoring officer not agree with that recommendation, written reasons will be provided to members of the Standards Committee. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Moore.
Can I just come in on this before we leave it? What happens if the 3 independent members can't make a recommendation?
In what way? Sorry.
There are 3 people sat around a table. 2 are diametrically opposed, and 1 sits in the middle and says, "I don't know." It's about. We can't vote, and I don't think in that situation we can't make a recommendation. We can't even make a decision. So what would happen in that situation?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Surely that would work in the same way as it does when you in a court, whereby it's a majority vote. If you have 2 people who strongly feel and the other one is not either way, then you would go with the majority. I assumed that's why we had 3 people.
I think that's a valid point, and also just to say that we quite often have 3 members. Councillor Parker will know we have the licensing subcommittee, which is a 3-member committee, and I'm very pleased to say that in my time at this authority we've never been in a position where we've been unable to reach a decision, and I hope that would continue to be the case.
I've got to say, knowing the independent members, I think it's very doubtful that we wouldn't be able to come up with some some recommendation between us. Any more questions for Melanie? You note the report? I don't believe there's any reason to exclude the press and public for the meeting, is there? No. Or the confidential exempt items for information, there are none. Therefore, at 7 o'clock, I declare the meeting closed.